Okay, I want to make a quick guide on how I handle the Sage Seer. First I'll start with some of my utility points here. These are the ones that I've chosen for specific reasons. Force Wave, it heals up to 7 affected allies. I find this to help turn one more of my abilities into a heal. That's kind of unmanaged. I don't have to worry about targeting anybody, just anybody around me it heals. Jedi Resistance gives me increased damage reduction. Benevolent Haste increases movement speed of the target of my Benevolence cast by 50% for 6 seconds. Under Masterful, I picked Block Out. Activating Cloud Mine gives me an extra 25% damage reduction. Metaphysical Alacrity reduces the cooldown of Force Speed by 5 seconds, Force Slow by 3 seconds, and Force Barrier by 30 seconds, so I find this one to kind of help with some of my defensive cooldowns. However, limited. Valiance, I believe that it says, reduces the damage taken by the target of your rescue by 25% for 6 seconds, and additionally increases the healing done by Force Mend by 30%. The ones I've selected for Heroic are Force Mobility. I find this one to be instrumental to help make one more of my heals be able to be casted on the move. In this instance, Healing Trance can now be casted while moving, and that is a long channel. So it helps to be able to move around while that one's going so you can make sure you can get it off. Swift Rejuvenation, Restoration, grants swift rejuvenation, making your next ability with an activation time activate instantly. The effect cannot occur more than once every 30 seconds, and it lasts for 15 seconds. The last one I have picked is Valorous Spirit. Force Mend increases your damage reduction by 15% for 6 seconds. So Force Mend is your self-heal that essentially makes this one also increase your damage resistance. So the rotation that I typically use for healing, I've got two main setups here. First one is just kind of a standard rotation that I do for healing my tank. It is a cast of Rejuvenate. When you cast Rejuvenate, it puts this healing resonance on you. Periodic healing's increased. I then do Healing Trance, which then puts these stacks of Resplutence, or however you pronounce that. That makes your next stack of either Vindicate, improve, so you get your force back quicker. Salvation is the next one I cast. That makes your next Benevolence free for force usage. It doesn't cost you any force to use Benevolence in that case. So that's kind of my typical setup. Cast Rejuvenate, Healing Trance, Salvation, then Benevolence. Then I'll kind of go through a bit of a repeat. As I see myself starting to run out of force, I'll kind of change it up a little bit. I'll do Rejuvenate, then Healing Trance. Then I'll start casting some copies of Vindicate until my force gets back up, or that little instacast thing goes down, saying that I'm no longer getting bonus. Then the specific tactical or set bonus that I am wearing, these stacks of Weary will start popping up on you if you cast Vindicate too many times, showing that you are weary to the force. You stop regenerating forces rapidly. The set that I'm using makes Benevolence eat those charges and do bonus healing. So it helps to keep your force up. The other heal up here, Deliverance, is a long channel like Healing Trance, but can't be used on the move, so I don't use it as much, but it's kind of a good burst up. It does a lot of increase to health. See it ticking there. And it also has the stacks that make Benevolence instacast and not use any force on usage. Now, talk about kind of my gear loadout here a little bit. The tacticals and set pieces that I've chosen to use, I go with the Empowered Restores set bonus. That gives me Force Armor, Empowered Restoration to its target, restoring 2755 health over 12 seconds. Surrounding a target with Force Armor immediately heals it for a chunk of health there. So I find that to be a good one to help with the force armor. I also use one piece of the Amplified Champion to help give me that extra extra amplifier for PvP and things of that nature. So let's talk about amplifiers for a moment. So some of the ones that I've chosen in my gear, and these, as if you've had any experience with amplifiers, can be very difficult to roll for. Costs a lot to get you up there. But the ones I've tried to focus on are the ones that I use the most, which is the periodic heals. So getting those periodic heals, I know I've got some of them. Periodic restoration is the one I look for a good bit. You've also got some ready healing for the first 10 seconds of combat. You deal increased healing. Oral rejuvenation is for all of your AoE heals like salvation. Salvation is kind of more of a one different from the rest in the fact that it just does an area of effect, so I try not to go with the aura because salvation also does the heal over time. So I try to roll my amplifiers more toward the periodic effects for healing. Force harmonization is another that will benefit your healing. So those are the ones that I've tried to roll for, and as you can see in some of my gear, I've managed to get some pretty good copies. Others, I've got some opportunities to continue to re-roll. Tactical. Now this is the tactical that I've kind of fell in love with here. There's several different ones to choose from, and everybody's kind of got their own preference to what works good for them. This one I find helps me mitigate more healing and do a little bit extra DPS during raids. Metaphysical Mender. I have not found this one in the store. I believe it is just from gear drops and boxes, weekly conquest, and things of that nature. It may pop up in raids, flashpoints, and so forth. So essentially it turns telekinetic blitz into a heal. It heals an ally within 20 meters of the damaged enemy. The healing scales up with each charge of empowered, and empowered charges also reduce the force telekinetic blitz consumed by 30% per charge. So what that basically means is as you cast telekinetic blitz, it then reflects a heal back onto a target. From what I've noticed in my experiments with using telekinetic blitz, if there were several party members stacked around, sometimes it goes to somebody that's already healed, but 9 times out of 10 it seems to reflect back onto a target that does need healing. I have, however, noticed it occasionally will target a target that's pretty well at full health when there's somebody else that could benefit from it. So it is a bit erratic as to who it's healing, but I do find 9 times out of 10 the tank's standing pretty close to the target. I'll switch over to the tank's target and cast the telekinetic blitz. From running Star Parse, I can tell you it's usually one of my highest hitting heals is casting telekinetic blitz. Benevolence being the second, just because of some of the buffs from casting Vindicate and having those stacks taken off, gives you a 50% increase to critical. So let's talk stats for a second. I go with a very high alacrity build on my Sage Seer. I've seen a lot of different recommendations as to what the best numbers are to run, everywhere from high crit, high alacrity, and so forth, but I found these two numbers look to work pretty good. I've got all of my gear augmented with level 10 augments in a variety of patterns to get me up to this point, but I find it's done a pretty good job of getting me min-maxed up to the best possible. From what I read, anything above 15% alacrity kind of starts giving you some diminishing returns, and my critical chance is equally high. 40% plus was my target. I managed to get up to 43% after I augmented my gear, so I'm pretty happy with both of those stats, and I see my my heals do a decent job of critting, and I see my force bar does a pretty good job of regenerating itself. That's this stat line here. Force regenerate is also affected by your alacrity stat, so I found the higher I could push that number, the better I could maintain a strong force, although keeping Vindicate into your rotations helps to fight off the drain that the Sage Seer feels from casting too many heals. You'll see I'm maybe using the mouse here, but I'm typically a keyboard player. I don't use the mouse for a lot of things, but as you start to get through your heal cycles, you'll see that that starts to tick down pretty quickly. Especially as you cast Benevolence, it has one of the higher force charges at taking 58 force. So whenever you can make Benevolence free, strive to do so that you can save your force meter, because it does go down pretty quickly. So some precasting that I do to help mitigate some damage. When we're getting ready for combat, and I do this throughout combat too, but my opener, I like to cast Force Armor on the tank and the raid party members in my raid panel. I'll then put on 3 stacks of Vindicate to be ready for Benevolence, and I'll then cast Wandering Mend. Now it will stick on the tank, and it will only tick if the tank takes damage. So as the tank takes a hit, Wandering Mend has 4 charges. It will heal them for 1 charge, and then it can bounce to other party members without me having to directly click and focus on them as a target. I find this helps me continue to cast on the tank while healing other DPSs that may be taking some splash damage or have otherwise taken a hit from something. But that's kind of my opener, I like to think of it, is putting on the Force Armor for the entire party. It helps to mitigate a lot of damage, and as the battle progresses, I'll make sure to keep targeting the different party members and reapplying Force Armor to help mitigate damage. It really helps to save that force bar from going down. If you can keep the damage from happening, you won't have as much to heal, and that helps tremendously in trying to keep your raid team alive. Now, there's 3 other powers of note on here that I want to talk about. The first is Force Potency. This increases your critical chance. This is great to cast if you start seeing that your team members are taking a substantial amount of damage and you need to kind of help pick things up. You can pop Force Potency, and that helps with the critical ticks on all of your force powers. I in particular like to use Force Potency in conjunction with my starter rotation, doing Rejuvenate, then Healing Trance, and then Salvation, and then continuing on with some of the other ones if I see the need. This power here, Mental Alacrity, is great at speeding up activation times. I don't see it tremendously useful when it comes to my general rotation. I think my powers tend to tick off pretty quickly, and the only one that really has a long channel time is this Healing Trance at 2.3 seconds. And I see using Alacrity as a huge waste on just this one power, because it only lasts a very short few seconds. It lasts 10 seconds, so this taking up 2.3 seconds of my channel time. Essentially, I'd only be popping this power to use it for this, because the rest of them tend to activate pretty quickly. As you can see, Rejuvenate's an instacast, then Healing Trance, and then Salvation has a long channel time, and then Benevolence is now instacast. So you'll see and pay attention to down here on your bar the different stacks that you're getting. You'll notice you can do a pretty good job of making Benevolence instacast if you start getting those stacks of, I think it's Replustance, or however you pronounce that. It consumes those stacks so that you get some chances to proc and instacast some of these powers here. You'll see them pop up, and that gives you a pretty good heal. So Mental Alacrity I tend to save for some help with DPS burns. Typically I'll cast Mental Alacrity, and then I can smash with Disturbance. The first cast is pretty long, but I found after that it goes pretty friggin' quick, and you can really pound out some extra DPS to help in some burn phases on some boss. When I see it go back up to 1.3 seconds, that's my ticket to stop, and then go back to helping with heals, and typically go back to Telekinetic Blitz, as it really does some nice heals back at you, and you don't really have to worry about clicking on or finding the raid members that you're after. It'll just bounce back typically to who needs it the most, but again, sometimes you kind of have to just kind of cross your fingers and hope it goes the right way, but 9 times out of 10 I do notice that it hits the person that you're after. Alright, one more main power I want to talk about, and then I want to talk about Cleanse, is this Force Empowerment. This is your raid buff. It does increase Mastery, Endurance, and Presence for you and your operations group members within 40 meters by 10%, last 10 seconds. This is the one I like to pop for that burn phase for bosses, or if I see that we're starting to get into a little bit of a pickle, I'll pop Force Empowerment, and that makes all of your mastery, endurance, and presence. So the two key stats there, of course, mastery and endurance, your health and your power and crit and so forth will be boosted by mastery. That'll help do some extra damage and put out some extra healing for 10 seconds, which can severely turn the tide if you're starting to fall behind. It's good to help out with those burn phases. Now I'm going to talk about our cleanse restoration. This removes cleanses friendly targets of up to 2 negative mental or force effects. So I want to talk about how I've got my group and ops frame set up. So what I've done is I've gone into preferences. The operations frame is the big one that I use and you'll use for your operations. I've got the operations frame scale turned all the way up to 1.25. The ones that you're going to want to pay attention to is the debuff scale. I've got it turned up to make them about this big, as you see my buffs down here, and the buff scale turned down. I don't really need to pay too much attention to buffs, just the debuffs. And you can play around with it to where it makes sense for you. I've got the party spacing set to 20, groups per row, groups visible, all that's pretty straightforward. Health width, I've got this turned up a little bit to be able to help see the health bars a little bit better, and I've got this here selected too, showing only removable debuffs. You want to make sure that's clicked so that you're not paying attention to debuffs that you cannot cleanse. So what that looks like, if you're looking at your ops frame, you'll be able to see in big bold pictures any debuffs that pop up on your raid team. A good one to practice with is to run Hammer Station on Master Mode. The very first boss puts a stacking debuff on the target of its laser beam. That'll help train you to take a look at those debuffs and know when to cleanse and see those stacks start popping up and how to clean those off. Several raid mechanics and several flashpoint bosses have the mechanics of putting stacking debuffs on targets. Some can be cleansed, some cannot. Having that check mark up with only being able to see the removable debuffs helps focus your attention on just what you as a healer can do to cleanse your raid team to keep them battle hardy. Now, if you're doing Flashpoint, you'll want to adjust your group frames too. I've scaled them up a little bit, and again, I have increased the debuff size and decreased the buff size so that I can pay attention to those more readily. Now, there's no option here for only showing the removable debuffs that I'm seeing at least in front of me. Maybe I found it in a separate area. I do encourage you to look around and see if you can find that. Maybe I haven't. I'm just not seeing it in front of me at the moment. But you'll want to do that for all 3 of the group frame panels so that you can see what's happening there. I've also kind of got set up down here the target of target cast bar and my target of target. So typically, as a healer, it can be difficult to see when the boss is setting off something that you can interrupt or help to interrupt. What I've done here is I have set my target of target cast bar. Essentially, if I'm targeting the tank will be targeting the boss, and I'll be able to see the boss's cast bar here pop up over who I have targeted as typically is the tank. So if I'm seeing that pop up, I know to be ready to help heal the tank or to pull the tank back or to keep the tank buffed up with some force armors and so forth to help mitigate any damage that might be coming their way. Now here in the center of my screen, I apologize, I have set up so it's right in front of my face my target cast bar. So that tells me kind of what the tank's working on, or if I've got the boss selected as I'm firing some telekinetic blitzes at them, I can see directly in front of me what's going on with my target. There's also another option that I have set up on my UI that I find helpful, and that is the focus target option. The default hotkey for this is Alt F4. It can be set up in the preferences, and that I just have set up so that I can essentially keyboard target one additional person outside my raid frame. It is under preferences, key bindings. Key bindings. It is under targeting. You'll scroll down here to focus target. I may have already passed it. Set focus target. Here it is. Target swap. Alt F4. So I will target this operations dummy, and then I will hit Alt F4, and it'll set that focus target up here. So what I can do is I can select another operations member outside my ops frame, say the off tank, and I can set them as my focus target, so that if I see them starting to get low on damage, since I'm not much of a mouse clicker, I like to use the keyboard for everything, so this is kind of something maybe to help you keyboarders out, but instead of having to reach over here and click on them, I can Alt F4, and it puts them back down here as my now primary target. It gets a little wonky sometimes. If you've got keybinds set up to select your ops frame members and you hit that, it'll actually mess up your focus target. So when you're finished healing the off tank, Alt F4 to send it back up as your focus target, so that you can then target the rest of your raid members without messing up how you've set it up. That's pretty well the lowdown for what I kind of look for and how I go about healing. I hope it's been helpful. I haven't been able to find too much up on any internet guides for how to really set up a Sage Seer, so kind of more wanted to do this for more of our guild members than anything else. If you have any suggestions, feel free to chime in. I'm sure there's a lot that I've missed, as I'm still kind of learning the ins and outs of what all the different little buffs and stuff do, but I'd like to think I'm getting a decent mastery of everything. I guess the only other thing I can really mention is the usage of the adrenals and the stems and things of that nature. That's something I found helpful, is using the long duration stems with like the 480 minutes of bonus to mastery. And I really like the ones that do the critical and the accuracy. Accuracy doesn't benefit us from what I can tell, but it's tied in with that same stem. It buffs mastery and accuracy by a percentage for 480 minutes is the ones that I typically use. I'm afraid I don't have any on me right now to show you. That, and in addition, I do keep stacks of the medical packs on hand just to help with some extra healing on me, so I don't have to take these abilities and pop them on myself. I can help to use med packs in some smaller fights. Well, I guess one other button I did neglect to mention, now I just hovered over it, is Cloud Mind. This is what I like to call the threat throw. If you start seeing bad guys walk your way or something starts shooting you, this is the button that you use to get out of danger. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But it will lower your threat by some. Well, I guess I can go over two other buttons real quick. Force Barrier. This is what I like to call the oh crap button. If you've got something coming after you, and if you know you're going to take a large hit, for instance, if you're doing a Torbo's Courtyard and he drops that large blast on you, you can pop Force Barrier and mitigate all of that damage. It makes you immune for 8 seconds. It puts a stacking buff on you. I believe it's up to 6 seconds in, so you can cancel it after 6 seconds, but up to 6 seconds it puts a stacking buff on you that mitigates a lot of damage. So there you see 3, 4, 6 seconds, and then it doesn't stack anymore. So after that, if you want to get the full stacks, just keep it up for 6 seconds. Phase Walk's also a fun one. You can set that one if it's someplace that you need to get back to, or say you know, you're over here healing people and you've got some of the raid left on the other side. You can use that to instantly return to your previous position. And Rescue is another good one. If you see one of the DPSs, I do not use this on a tank, but if you start seeing that one of your DPSs is taking threat away from the tank, you can use Rescue to pull them to you, and it helps you do additional healing to them if you've got it set up in your utilities. That one that does the rescue, I believe it's like an extra 25% for restoration. So that's a good one to help manage threat for the tank if you start seeing that they're having some problems, or if you've got a raid member that's really starting to get pounded on and is generating a lot of threat. It's also a fun one to mess with your friends with, because this is one of the few abilities where you can really get into a lot of fun grabbing a raid member and just randomly pulling them back, as long as you've got that good fun mindset. There's several other abilities on the board. You can see I haven't talked about everything, but that's kind of the general gist of how I go about the Sage Seer routine, I guess you'd say. There's plenty of other situational buttons that I consider outside of the general healing purview. A lot of the interrupts and stuff I leave to the tanks. If I need to jump in and help, you've got those buttons available. Most of those are very useful for PvP environments, not so much in a PvP setting where you've got sometimes 4 DPSers going around smashing things and tanks helping to manage the threat and so forth. I find it more beneficial to stay on the healing and ignoring a lot of the control abilities that the Sage Seer can bring to the table. Although, if you find that to be a helpful role to fill for your Flashpoint or raid group, feel free to dabble around with those. I find them just to take my focus off of my primary function as being a team healer, but however it wants to work for you. All right, well, again, I know I dabbled on a little bit longer after I said I was done here, but just wanted to fill in some more information and make sure I was thorough and going over kind of how I play the Sage Seer. Hope it was helpful.